Dear colleague, welcome. It's Dr. Jack Krasuski, and today's video blog post is on how to stop making yourself miserable, right? Method A, I'm just going to label them by letters A, B, C, D, and E, because this is the first in a 5-part series. And it grew out of a conversation I had at a recent holiday party I attended. And people often learn that I'm a psychiatrist, so they start engaging me in kind of psychologically focused topics. And one person said, why are so many people I know miserable? They're financially very well off, they have stable careers, stable families, everything seems to be going well, but they seem to be under kind of constant stress. They're just unhappy, they're miserable sometimes. And I had to stop to think about it, and I said, we often engage in certain, counterproductive, strategies that actually make us miserable. So in a way, I'm blaming the victim. But, on the other hand, I think it's part of human nature to use these kind of strategies that may feel good in the short term, but actually are counterproductive in the long term. So the topic for today is to stop labeling yourself. So my contention is that we often have ways of labeling ourselves that lead us to be miserable. So I'm going to cover 3 topics today related to this. And number one, I want to introduce the concept of the conceptualized self. Then I want to talk about some of the downsides of having this conceptualized self that is too rigid and not inclusive enough of all different parts of ourselves. And then the third part will be how to implement, having a more flexible self-concept. Okay, so let's start with the self-concept. So, as we go through the day, we are kind of like our normal kind of selves living through life minute by minute. But there's a part of us which is made up of our self-beliefs. These are beliefs that we developed on our own, probably from childhood. We've internalized other people's expectations for us. And so often these beliefs or these labels that we have about ourselves are kind of our idealized selves, right? And there's nothing wrong with having beliefs about oneself and even kind of like our ideals about ourselves. Those are good things, except when they become too rigid and kind of too limiting of ourselves. So, to the side of me is this funny image that I just made up on PowerPoint, and it represents the fact that we are very complex creatures living in very complex environments. There are a lot of parts, moving parts to ourselves. We have different types of temperament, different other parts of our personality. We have drives, we have desires, we have fears, we have expectations of ourselves, right? And we could develop a self-concept which is, rejecting of parts of those of ourselves. So we may go through life thinking like, I'm a winner, I'm strong, I'm kind, I'm a hard worker, I'll outwork everybody. And those are good beliefs to have about oneself, except when they become too exclusionary of other parts of ourselves. Because you know what? Yes, we are kind, except when we're not. And we are hard workers, except sometimes we're not hard workers, right? Sometimes we're winners until we fail, right? So there's, one of the problems with having these self-labels is they can include big parts of ourselves. They're not inclusive enough. So in extreme cases, as a psychiatrist, I've had many patients who are walking around almost like ghostly people because they've excluded so many parts of themselves that they just ignore or reject. They don't know who they are, what they want, what makes them happy. It's like they've lost touch with themselves. So that's the first problem with having a rigid, non-inclusive self-concept, right? These self-labels, by the way, they're beliefs, right? And the second problem is then, when you form a box around what you feel is acceptable about you, then all of a sudden parts of you there's an inside and then there's an outside. There's a boundary. Certain things are acceptable, things you want to believe about yourself, and other things that you reject about yourself. And then that may lead to a kind of constant vigilance. So if you rigidly believe that you're a winner, every time you're faced with a challenge, it becomes like a life and death situation. You take an exam and you fail, And all of a sudden, your self-concept might come crumbling down. What? I'm no longer a winner? Who am I then? Instead of being more inclusive, like, yeah, I'm a very smart person. I tend to do very well. But you know, there are going to be times where I fail. And those may be opportunities for me to learn and to grow. So, you know, the second problem with this kind of rigid self-concept is we become too vigilant and we place this ongoing burden of ourselves to kind of keep up with these ideals. A third problem with the conceptualized self is that because of this ongoing vigilance to try to live up to these sometimes hard to attain ideals, we become rigid. It's sort of like it's harder to actually accept those parts of ourselves that we would rather not have, right? But then that kind of then becomes like a self-sustaining process. It's hard to become more fluid, more flexible in that way. So what does this all lead to? Well, again, it causes people to be unhappy, feel a sense of like ongoing vigilance and a burden and ongoing stress, as opposed to just being more accepting of oneself. Now, the good news is that the self-concept, these self-labels, they're not unconscious. You do not need psychoanalysis. You do not need to be hypnotized. All you need is a little bit of self-reflection and then self-compassion. Okay? So now let me tell you what the benefits are of having, you know, a more flexible self-concept. Well, imagine that you're a coach, you know, pick a sport that you like, and you're a coach, college coach, and you're seeking out like very talented high school athletes, whether they're swimmers, soccer players, basketball players. Would you rather just know the strengths of a student athlete, or would you like to know as much as possible about them? Well, if you're a coach, you want to know everything about that person, their strengths, their weaknesses, their quirks, right? Their ability to persevere, the things that kind of trip them up. The same thing, the more we know about ourselves, I think the more it opens up, you know, avenues of success and happiness to us. The second benefit is if you have parts of yourself that you really dislike, maybe even hate, or are disgusted by, then you can't be an ally to yourself. If you can't accept parts of yourself, then who will? I mean, who will? You have to be your best friend. You have to have that self-compassion, right? All I'm asking is that you treat yourself as you would a friend, or extend the kindness to yourself that you would extend even to a stranger. Now, as you're listening to me, you may have some kind of concerns. Like, for instance, like, well, Jack, if I give up my ideals, then, you know, then what's going to happen? Am I going to, like, turn out to be kind of like a lazy person? Am I going to start acting like a jerk because I'm no longer kind of thinking I'm kind, or I'm a winner, or I'm hardworking? And I think the answer is no, that you will not, because you have values. And it's not that you have to just completely jettison these ideals or jettison them at all, but just approach them more flexibly. So, you know, you are kind, but not always, because we're human, we fall short. So you can maintain that idea like, I always strive to be kind. And when I'm not, I'm going to reflect and try to do better. Yes, I'm a very hardworking, successful person. You know, I put in the hours, I put in the effort. Right, but what if you fail? You can say, well, I always strive to do my best, but there are going to be setbacks, there are going to be failures. There are things I'm just not very good at, and other things I'm very good at. And so I will go through life trying to learn, and I will always do my best because I'm in a growth mindset. Another thing, there might be things about yourself that are kind of hard to accept because they really dislike them, or even kind of, you know, like I said, even disgusted by. You know, you never know. You know, none of this, what I'm telling you, do you need to share with anyone? These are your own private thoughts, right? You will share them with other people only if and when and with whom you choose to do so. Third is, you don't have to change your behaviors at all. So for instance, if you kind of accept like, I really don't like, being home raising kids. I'd rather be at work. Or maybe, conversely, you might say, I'd rather not be working anymore. I'd rather be home raising my kids. I lost my verve for kind of being a clinician. Whatever it is. But if, for example, if you tell yourself, well, I really do not prefer the company of young children, right? Which may be the worst thing you can imagine about yourself, right? You must have a very dark soul indeed, right? That doesn't give you permission to all of a sudden be a rotten parent, because your kids deserve to have the best parent that they can have. If you admit to yourself that some of your patients you just really dislike, that they are kind of like self-centered, narcissistic blowhards that never do what you advise them to do anyway, doesn't mean you're going to treat them badly or counter-therapeutically. In fact, I would submit to you, by being more open with your feelings and your thoughts, your self-labels, your self-beliefs, that it will actually give you more insight into yourself. And I think you're more likely then to act to be the best parent that you can be, to be the best clinician that you can be. And the last thing is, these things that I've said, maybe they don't resonate very much with you, or maybe they do. There's nothing you need to do in the short term. Kind of sleep on it and see how this may kind of resonate with you, weeks or months or even years later. So I submit to you, I think that by having a more flexible and a more self-compassionate kind of a way of conceptualizing ourselves can actually lead to a lot less misery and stress and unhappiness, and actually help us grow to be better human beings and more successful at what we do. So that's my thought for today. Dr. Jack signing off. Until next time, when I'll be back with Method B. Until then, thank you.